Imagine you lived in the days of Jesus Christ. You had heard some of his teachings and you were inspired. And so you began to follow him on the road as he taught. Eventually, you decide that you would like to become one of his disciples. You approach Jesus and you tell him this. You ask him what is required to be one of his followers. And he says to you, first, you must sell everything you own, give up your family to follow him. Could you follow Jesus under such circumstances? And why would Jesus ask such why would Jesus demand such an austere approach? In this video, I'd like to discuss that topic. Hi, my name is Richard Haight. I spent my entire life studying spirituality. I spent 15 years in Japan studying the ancient arts, having received 5 master's licenses, healing arts, and in martial arts. And through the training and visionary experiences, I received a great wisdom that can only be described as that which the ancient ones referred to as the oneness, the universal love, or agape. I'd like to share some of that wisdom with you. Are you a spiritual seeker seeking greater harmony in your life? I'd like to share with you 3 paradigm shifts that will greatly lighten your spiritual load. I'm offering a free masterclass. You can click the link below to join. You're going to love it. And now onto the content of this video. Those who've read the Bible have probably read the Sermon on the Mount. The Sermon on the Mount is often described as the most profound of Jesus' teachings. But what's often not understood is that the Sermon on the Mount rests upon 2 important points. It's actually a kind of cross. One is, for these teachings to be successful, they must be vertically in alignment, and they must also be horizontally in alignment. What I mean by vertically in alignment is that they must be in alignment with the Godhead, which is essentially a state of transcendent consciousness that is not caught up in personal identification. And the second important requirement is that the teaching must be in alignment with, and the expression must be in alignment with, the horizontal principle, which is nature. So we've got the transcendent and we have the natural principles. And in the Sermon on the Mount, he describes several principles that people oftentimes have great difficulty living up to, and quite honestly, Christians for the most part have simply punted on. The first one is the teaching of turn the other cheek. And there's a lot of depth in this teaching. And so I'd like to read the basic teaching of turn the other cheek with you now, so you can get an idea of what Jesus was referring to and what Christians might be perceiving, and maybe some means by which we can explore this concept. And this is really with regards to retaliation. So Jesus says, "You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth." This is the teaching of Hammurabi, or also taught through Moses, which is, if somebody takes your eye, you take their eye. That's the law. But I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil. But if anyone slaps you on your right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if anyone would sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. Give to the one who begs to you, and do not refuse the one who borrows from you. So this is the basic teaching of turn the other cheek. What does this teaching really mean? The question that I received was, is this condoning bad behaviors, condoning violence? It's important to understand that turn the other cheek is not the same thing as pacifism exactly. It doesn't mean that we're condoning violence. In fact, turn the other cheek works best when we don't go into, let's say, a submissive state of mind, when we don't go into a victim mindset, but instead stay in a state of vibrant awareness. Turn the other cheek fails when we respond in anger. It also fails when we respond in victimization. The way to make turn the other cheek effective is to stay in a place of vibrant, calm awareness. while still stating the positivity of your case. Gandhi did this well. Martin Luther King did this well during the civil rights marches. Gandhi during the 1930s and 40s in South Africa, as well as India during apartheid. And so what they would do is actually march to wherever it was that they were going to make a stand, and actually make a stand. It could be against the English army, British army, or it could be against the wealthy who were taking advantage of them. It didn't matter. Whatever they thought was going on that was not right, they ceased physically resisting through violence. So it was a non-violent resistance, but there was still a resistance. It wasn't an anger-based resistance. It wasn't a victimization-based resistance, but it was a resistance that showed their humanity. And so it requires a tremendous self-control. And so the first important pillar of this is that we are actually in tune with something higher than mere emotionality. But if we look at this teaching and it goes further, if anyone would sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. We all know there are plenty of people that would happily take our house. There are people who would, given the opportunity, would easily murder us to take the $10 out of our pocket. Should we turn the cheek to them as well? Of course not. What Jesus is talking about is really largely slights to your person, insults, a slap to the cheek. This is a very personal thing. A slap to the cheek it's an attack on your person. He's also talking about taking your physical wealth. And this cannot work unless the turning of the cheek cannot work unless you are willing to give up everything. If we think about Jesus's life and how he lived his life, he describes himself as having no place to lay his head. Jesus spent 40 days and 40 nights in the desert. Jesus lived with John the Baptist, who ate insects in the wilderness. This was a person who had intimate awareness of how to live with the earth. This was a person who could live as an ascetic and probably could thrive. He knew where to get his food naturally without farming. He was completely confident in his relationship with the earth. And in fact, he discusses this at the very end of the Sermon on the Mount. And it's very, very important always to be aware of the very first teaching and the last teaching in any teachings. And he's describing, do not worry. Therefore, I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body, what you will wear. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothes? Look at the birds of the air. They do not sow or reap or store away in barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more valuable than they? Can any one of you, by worrying, add a single hour to your life? And why do you worry about clothes? See how the flowers of the fields grow? They do not labor or spin. Yet I tell you that not even Solomon in his great splendor was dressed like one of these. If that is how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and tomorrow is thrown into the fire, will he not much more clothe you, you of little faith? So do not worry, saying, what shall we eat? Or what shall we drink? Or what shall we wear? For the pagans run after all these things, and your heavenly Father knows that you need them. But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. And therefore, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has its own trouble. Each day has enough trouble of its own. You will note here that Jesus says, first seek the kingdom of heaven, and first seek his kingdom, God's kingdom, and his righteousness. Right useness, that's the key there. Righteousness is not a snooty attitude. Right useness, how to use your mind, body, your expression in the world. Get that right. And then all of these things will come to you. It does not mean you're going to be rich. This is not really about getting rich, but it is about being atoned, or at one, atoned. The atonement means at one-ment, to be atoned, to be at one, to be unified. This is first and foremost. You'll note that modern governments do not allow you to live in nature, do not allow you to live. You have to rent a place. You have to purchase property. You can't just go into the national forest and live in a cave. You will be arrested. And so this modern society does not allow for what Jesus was talking about, to be able to live hand to mouth in the forest or in the wilderness. In such a circumstance, how do we live by those same principles? Indeed, it's very difficult. And I would suggest that we need to go more to the root of what Jesus is actually talking about, and that is simply not reacting out of anxiety, not living your life out of anxiety, and not living your life out of emotionality, but instead being in a vibrant, calm awareness as much as possible. If someone is trying to kill you, it is right that you may defend your body. If someone is trying to kill your child, of course, you will defend that child. But can you do it without anger? Can you do it with love? Sometimes you may have to kill a person. Can you kill that person with love? And the question there is, for example, if you were a murderer, and you think about your life now, if you knew that you were even going to become a murderer for whatever reason, maybe you had a brain tumor that would cause that phenomenon. That has happened. It's been scientifically verified, medically verified, that can happen due to brain damage. It can change our personality and temperament. It can also cause us to do things which are atrocious. If you knew that was going to occur, would you prefer to be kept alive and allowed to kill people, or would you rather die? Would you rather be killed? I, for one, would rather be killed. And it's possible to actually kill out of that same compassion in order to spare others and also prevent this person from doing more psychological harm to themselves and the world. It is possible to kill under such circumstances, but we do not kill in anger. We do not kill in malice. We do not respond in anger. We do not respond in malice. This is the most important thing. Gandhi used the principle of non-resistance, which is what he meant was non-violence, to overcome the apartheid, and ultimately Britain left the United Kingdom, or left India for that reason. But we must understand that it was the conscientiousness within the British soldiers and the conscientiousness within the British people and the English people that ultimately motivated England to leave. For they felt shame. Ultimately, a shame started to develop within them over what they were doing to these honorable people, the Indian people of the Indian subcontinent. If you are responding emotionally, it will not be viewed in an honorable way. So it requires a tremendous awareness to be rooted in a calm clarity. And we may not always succeed at that. This is an aim we move toward. In such a case, at least when we're dealing with people who are not trying to kill us, we can turn the other cheek. At least when we're dealing with people who are not trying to rape us, we can turn the other cheek. For those people that are seeking to harm us in deep, deep ways, we may have to actually deal with them physically for the betterment or for the sake of them as well as us, for the good of all. But we won't do it in anger, or at least practice not doing it in anger. Now, this brings us back to another teaching in the Sermon on the Mount, treasures in heaven. In our lives, oftentimes we are seeking to accumulate treasures. And Jesus warns, do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moths and vermin destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourself treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. This is very important teaching. What Jesus is talking about in treasures in heaven is not actually like pearls and gold in some other dimension. That's not what he's talking about exactly. What he's talking about is an inner clarity, an inner awareness that is with you at all times. And that ultimately opens up to the kingdom of heaven, a place where other people's opinions of you don't matter anymore, where your self-worth is not on the line anymore, where you are vibrantly alive and aware and clear. And the status of your name in society, the color or the type of car you drive, or how big your house is, or what neighborhood you live in, no longer is a priority for you. It no longer means anything as far as your assessment of self-worth goes. The reason I mention this in connection with turning the other cheek is much of the time that we are not turning the other cheek isn't because we're protecting our body or our loved ones. It's because we're protecting our image and self-worth, a false god. And so what I would recommend is stop playing with the false treasures. Stop investing your heart into measurements of self-worth, into how nice your car is or how great your house is, or even desiring such things. Because many times the poor who do not have such things strongly desire them. So even though they don't have them, they're still suffering from those desires. And of course, the wealthy might find that no matter how much they have, they're never satisfied. And so we simply pull back from that and we rest in the very center of being, awareness, without a question of our self-worth. And so I remind you, go ahead and click the link below for the free masterclass. You're going to love it. 3 paradigm shifts that will change your perspective on spirituality. Hope to see you there. Bye-bye.